Well, on your program, I'm supposed to speak about inside the terror triangle. And it usually takes me an hour and a half. What time is it now? Oh, I haven't got enough time. So I'm going to cut it real short and then leave on a positive note, if you don't mind. And that is that, first of all, I want to ask you a question. For you historians, what is the longest war in United States history?
The War on Liberty.
222 years. Which, I haven't heard it yet. No, the war on drugs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask anybody in the audience, can you tell me a single city, county, or state in this glorious union that has ever had a 24-hour period of time where the drugs have dried up and unavailable due to the war on drugs? Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're witnessing the same sort of thing with the war on terror. The war on terror has been going on now officially 99 months total. Now, that is more than our involvement in World War I and World War II combined. Now, in the next couple of months, you can throw in the Korean War as part of that combination as well, and the war on terror will be just as long as our involvement in those three wars. Now, how did we get into this mess anyway? We were given the story that it is a war on terror, but we don't really understand what terror is. And terror is a political entity. It is not something that's done by a lone bomber. It's not a crazed individual that sits in his apartment and scrawls a diary to prove to the world that he is an insane individual and he's just a lone gunman, and he travels all over the country with no visible means of support, following his victim on the airplanes and so on and so forth, but never, never, never think that there's organization behind it, because here's his diary to prove it. He's just a lone gunman. Those things do not exist. There's organization behind all of these things. There's organization behind terrorism because it has a political purpose. The primary purpose that is usually given is because they want to overthrow the government of whatever target nation it happens to be. The second reason is to change the policies and the form of government without overthrowing a government. That's the second purpose. And that's almost always the purpose of terror. It's rarely overthrowing a nation. And we can see examples of the second in history, of changing the policies and changing the form. And when you're trying to change the policies of government and changing the form of government, it's usually brought about by the government itself, because they want those changes of policy and they want to change the form of government because they don't like we the people. They want us, the clique, to run things, and they can't do it under the current form. The Reichstag fire in Germany, for instance, shortly after Hitler was named as chancellor, was performed by the Nazis themselves to bring about a state of emergency based on a pre-planned agenda that the Nazis had, that when the fire was still burning in the morning, they went out and rounded up lists of people that they had prepared to round up. They got an enabling act passed that gave the chancellor powers to where he became Fuhrer. Then they lined up the German troops and they said, now you will pledge allegiance to the Fuhrer Adolf Hitler instead of the Constitution of the German Reich. And it was all done through one act of terror by the government itself. Likewise, in Bolshevik Russia, they got the Cheka, which is the forerunner of the NKVD, et cetera, and the KGB and so on, to go out and perform acts of terror on their own people. Then they blamed it on some conspiracy of terrorists. And in the name of that conspiracy of terrorists, went out and round up all the leadership that were of the anti-communist movement, shot them, threw them in ditches, until they had total control, and then they dropped all pretext of a war on terror and built the Gulag system of concentration camps that has become famous in Siberia. It was all done through acts of terror. Robert Welch told us in the late 1970s, and for those of you who are unfamiliar, who might not be members of the society, Robert Welch is the man who founded the John Birch Society. And he told us in the late 70s, this very astute historian, that terrorism had become the most important aspect in the arsenal of the tools of the insiders to subjugate us and enslave us. And we should listen to those words, because that's what terrorism has become. It reacts people into accepting something they wouldn't normally accept under peaceful conditions. How many of you can sit there and imagine you standing still for the onerous policies of our own government, for instance, that we've been inflicted with since 9/11 in the way of searches and seizures and everything at our airports? It's inconceivable. My wife and I took a trip across the peaceful waters of Puget Sound recently on board a ferry, and the Coast Guard came up in their rigid rubber boats with machine guns manned in the front and aft, fore and aft. I'm sorry for you Navy people. And at any rate, they came up and lined up alongside the ferry. And so, what's this? Well, we took off to go across the Puget Sound, and then they started going alongside of us. The loudspeaker kept repeating over and over again, "This is a standard exercise of Homeland Security. It's nothing to concern yourself about." Over and over and over again, sort of like Pavlovian announcements. Well, at any rate, we get across the main part of Puget Sound and start going into the inlets, going into Bremerton, Washington. And these craft would speed ahead at 30, 35 knots, I'm not really sure, but quite swiftly, and would come up to pleasure boats, mom and dad and the kids, out for a peaceful day on the waters, and they would do an immediate U-ey right alongside of them, and then stare them down with these machine guns, all as an exercise for Homeland Security. Now, if you were a father, would you feel secure? Or would you feel intimidated? How would your kids feel in such an instance? Those sorts of things before 9/11 were not even thought of. We would never have tolerated that sort of thing. But in the name of terror, the war on terror, we're tolerating them. And people are beginning to actually applaud them. Now, when you go through TSA sites at the airport, if you're a little child, now they give you a junior TSA agent badge to put on at the airports. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. It is a reaction to create in the American people to stand still for what they're doing to us and taking our rights away, because it's a violation of the First and the Fourth and the Fifth and the Sixth Amendments of the Constitution, the things they do every moment they're on duty at an airport. And yet we stand there and allow it. It is a sad state of affairs. And we are told, because in a recent article in USA Today by our Homeland Security Secretary, Janet Napolitano, that we will always be living under a terrorist threat. Always? That's the word she used. You mean the war on terror is never going to be over? Well, the way it's going, it doesn't appear to be. We went into Iraq to get rid of the terrorists, then we went into Afghanistan to get rid of the terrorists. Now we're told they're in Pakistan and maybe Iran. There's someplace, we'll find them one of these days and eliminate them. Well, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is a war on a condition, not a country. You can't go into a country and solve this problem. You can take out terrorist training camps. You can take out their financing and everything else. Because today our intelligence bureaus have the capability of interdicting all of their messages, interdicting all of their financial transactions, so why don't they do that? instead of putting our men and women in harm's way. And so the thing that we see is that, I don't know how many of you have seen these documentaries on television, but these documentaries tell us that the NSA were following Osama bin Laden 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the time, the years ahead of 9/11, and then suddenly on 9/11, he disappears into a cave in Afghanistan. They can't find him. But he's communicating, you understand, with Al-Qaeda all the way from Central and North Africa, all the way across the Islamic Empire into Indonesia and the Moros of Philippines, which are also Muslim communists. And he's running this whole thing, and it's a daily occurrence of bombings and killings and assassinations, and they're running this thing from a cave in Afghanistan. It doesn't compute. You had, did I say Afghanistan? Okay. You had a great congressman here from Georgia some years ago who was chairman of the John Birch Society, Larry McDonald. Larry McDonald served on the Armed Forces Committee, and he was doing a lot of work on terrorism, investigating terrorism, formed an organization specifically to ferret out what was behind terrorism as we saw it in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s. And he had a lot of admirals and generals and intelligence personnel experts involved in his organization called Western Goals. They came out with a very good video called No Place to Hide. But the point that they made throughout all of this was that there was no such thing as independent terrorists. They were all state-sponsored. Jack says, no, they weren't from Massachusetts. But in every case, those states led back to Moscow, that Moscow had put together a deniability system through layers of responsibility. They would, for instance, go to one of the countries that they control, like Bulgaria, tell them that you've got to go out and form terrorist organizations in another country, and so they would go, say, to Turkey, and they would form a terrorist organization there. And then that organization would go to a fourth country and carry out an act of terror. Ladies and gentlemen, that is precisely the procedure that led to the assassination attempt on John Paul II when he was riding out in, somewhere in Rome, and this Muslim assassin tried to kill him. But he wasn't killed himself, the assassin. Usually assassins die in the attempt. If they don't die, they're usually bumped off real quick if they can get to them, to cut off that layer of evidence so that there's nothing that leads back to who's handling that assassin. And if they have to, they assassinate the handlers so that you get into cul-de-sacs and blind alleys and you can't investigate what's really going on. But we discovered that it went right back to Moscow, and Gorbachev was one of the guys as part of the KGB that signed off on it. And so that was what was going on then. Subsequently, they've added another layer of deniability, and that deniability layer is simply this. They've convinced the world and have used their control of media, and by they I mean the insiders, because the insiders are the ones that are running Moscow, as well as other parts of the world. But they've created a layer of deniability called Islam. It's all Islam. Read your paper. Islam, Islam, Islam. They never ask questions. Well, how come they're armed with Russian arms? How come this and how come that? Where did they get the logistics? Where did they get the intelligence to pull this off? Where's the organization? Obviously, there had to be an organization behind that. Where were they formed? Where were they trained? Who are these people? Don't ask that. It's Islam. Don't worry about it. It's simply Islam. Don't look behind a curtain. Just look at the Wizard of Oz. Don't pay any attention to that guy over there moving the levers. And that's the layer of deniability that they have done. There's a cottage industry in this country today, ladies and gentlemen, that's trying to convince the American people it's strictly Islam. We've got to hate each other, get into a religious war, and we'll solve the war on terror. That is just plain bull. And it's not the Christian way, is it? We are not to hate. And hatred is not a good way to make decisions. And so we have to look at it. And what happened was they had planned this for some time. If we read the books of Anatoly Golitsyn and others that came out of the KGB, that they'd been planning this for some time to collapse communism. The only place that communism is dead is in the minds of Americans, nowhere else. It's alive and well in Russia. Putin and company does not allow anybody to run against him unless he's his right-hand man. New parties, when they try and form them, they're put in prison. If they run for office, they're put in prison, or they're shot, or whatever. You just go on the internet. It won't take you long to establish that as true. And so what we see happening is that they, in this planning to put the death knell on communism, was to also take their terrorist network and put a new face on it. And so basically what happened was that the terrorist leaders became clerics in many cases, rabbis, Christians, imams. And so most of them, however, became imams. And in the United States, you have Stokely Carmichael of Burn Baby Burn. He became an imam. H. Rap Brown, the head of the Communist Black Panther Party, he became an imam. And that is what we have seen in the United States. And in Europe, Carlos the Jackal, the most famous terrorist of Europe, communist terrorist, whose father named him after Lenin, he became one of the leading authors of radical Islam. Now he's serving time in the French prison for his acts of terror. He just married his communist attorney while he's in prison. I guess you could do certain things in a French prison that you can't do whatever. But at any rate, these are just small examples of the fact that these terrorist leaders took on clerical garb to promote Marxism and continue forward with a disguise and a layer of deniability over what was really behind terror. And because they adopted new names, for instance, nobody recognized them as H. Rap Brown. I mean, this is 30 years later. He doesn't look like the H. Rap Brown when he was the head of the Black Panther Party and that kind of thing. So that's what's been going on. And if you take a look at the evidence that we've been able to put together relative to Osama bin Laden, al-Zawahiri, his chief lieutenant, in fact, the man that we've heard more from since 9/11 than Osama bin Laden himself, leading to the speculation that Osama bin Laden was dead for a while, testimony stating that al-Zawahiri is a KGB-trained Russian asset. Number two in the Al-Qaeda. There's other evidence even before he ever teamed up with Osama bin Laden as working in the communist terrorist organizations in the Balkans prior to that. And his chief lieutenant, his chief battle lieutenant in Afghanistan was also a KGB asset. So when you realize these things, you begin to see that there's something more to Islamic terrorism than what we're told in our daily newspapers or from our government. Now, if these lieutenants of Osama bin Laden are Russian assets, and they were the ones that brought down the Twin Towers, supposedly, what does that tell us? Russia had to have known prior to the event. And yet, we have declared Russia our ally on the war on terror. And one of the things that's part of the facade in all of this is that Putin has put together a joint American-Russian committee to fight the war on terror. And so he's got an American section and a Russian section of citizens. The American section is headed up by a man who wants to abrogate the Constitution of the United States and bring us into the New World Order as part of the war on terror, Henry Kissinger. The man he's put in charge of the Russian section is Primakov, who used to be the head of the KGB and personally ran the Islamic terrorist network. There's more to the war on terror than meets the eye. This is what's going on that you're not reading about anywhere except in the pages of the New American and in little booklets that we put out like this and DVDs, etc. We're being sold a bill of goods. We're being sold the idea that we need to produce a new world order because of the war on terror, that we can't have security without a war on terror and a merger with these other countries in the name of providing security. Look at what do they call it? Homeland what? What about the Security and Prosperity Partnership? Security again. You'll always see within everything they do to react us into standing still for it, and a major step that takes away our liberty, that word security, because we're just so scared about being hit with more terror. And that's not to say we won't be, but that's the problem. But at any rate, whether you go and see such diverse individuals as Castro before the United Nations, he called for a new world order. Gorbachev called for a new world order. Our seated Vice President of the United States wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal some years ago saying how I came to love the New World Order in 1992, and even has put out a booklet of all of his speeches on the floor of the Senate about how we should move towards a New World Order. And part of the table of contents is in the name of organizing security. And on and on. And then we even see that the National Security Strategy of the United States is the official booklet from the White House in August 1991 by George H.W. Bush, and the preface is a new world order. Moving, that's what we have to do. That is the official security strategy of the United States, is to move into a new world order. Now recently, we had an individual, and by the way, George Bush went in front of Congress during the first war, Iraq War, and said, we are there to help establish a new world order under the United Nations. Recently, we had a congressman yell at Obama, you lie. Not one man yelled at Bush, you traitor. Yeah. And none dare call it treason, right? What we see is treason. They are trying to do away with the United States of America in the name of a war on terror, and we're allowing them to do it because we're fighting the wrong enemy. We don't recognize what's really going on. And we've got to inform everybody we possibly can, particularly our congressmen, as to what's really going on. Inform yourself, and then inform others, particularly opinion voters, particularly local elected officials, and mostly your congressmen, because they've taken an oath to what? To defend the Constitution from what? All enemies, foreign and domestic. You know, we never identify the domestic enemies for these guys, do we?
Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi. It's a start. But Nancy Pelosi is really nothing in the general equation of things if you really look at what's going on and you understand what conspiracy is all about. But I don't want to leave you on a negative like that. Read the little booklet that we put out on this thing. You'll discover a lot more. In the appendix, we have a lot of different examples of individuals who've assumed clerical garb. Let me give you one little story, though, that's kind of humorous, because recently we had an individual approach the John Birch Society, and we are getting a lot of influence out there over the internet and such, and I'll talk about that for a second. But we had a man approach us and say, well, I don't agree with you on everything, but those things I do agree with you on, would you like some help writing? And so I was in Bill Hahn's office, and the head of the web team came in and said, do you know Rabbi Michael Lerner? No, don't know him. Bill had never heard of him. And Dennis, our man, was just about ready to leave the office. And I said, well, wait a minute. I know a Michael Lerner but I don't know if it's the same guy. Let's look him up online. The internet's a fantastic thing. And lo and behold, it was the Michael Lerner I used to know that J. Edgar Hoover said is the most dangerous terrorist in the United States. He was a leader of the communist SDS in Seattle when I used to live there. They used to blow things up, literally. And so what happened was he adopted the garb of a rabbi, because he couldn't do it as a Muslim because he was Jewish, right? So he became a rabbi. So he was one of those that is now selling Marxism under that garb, just like others are doing it as Muslims and others are doing it as Christians. For instance, well, I won't go. Just read the booklet. Another plug. But at any rate, how much time have I got?
None. Much as you want.
Okay. No, but I want to leave on a positive note, because I think we need that to boost our spirits to be able to fight this thing. And that is that the John Birch Society has got influence today that is just phenomenal. When you're talking to others to interest them in the society, sometimes we don't understand the significance of the organization well enough to get the point across as to why our organization is so important. If you read or re-listen to Robert Welch's Medicine Leads the Way, which he put together during the first time that they were trying to put socialized medicine on the country, he pointed out that the forces of evil and the forces of collectivism have always been organized, but the individualists never have been, because they're individualists. They don't like to be organized. They like to be left alone at their own device, and so on and so forth. And so he realized this, and that's why he put together the John Birch Society, because in the history of man, no private organization had ever been put together of concerned citizens that was going to last for centuries to educate their fellow citizens and activate them into an organization to stop what was being done to them. Not only to go forward and last for centuries in the United States, but to go forward into the world and produce liberty in those countries as well. Never been done before. And ladies and gentlemen, it hasn't been done since in the way that we're organized. Oh yeah, you have a lot of good organizations out there, mostly online, mostly paper, but they aren't boots on the ground in local chapter organization. Not reaching out. They're talking to each other. And it looks like success. I can go online and I can build myself a nice little social empire online, and that looks like a success. But is it growing the movement? Oh yeah, I can organize a dinner or a demonstration or something like that and have a certain number of people show up, and it may have the appearance of success, but is it really success in the sense of changing anything, of reaching out into the community and changing the lives and minds of our neighbors, particularly our opinion molders? It's really not. And those things can be used to actually polarize the community rather than change the community. We, as Birchers, go about our business quietly. We don't raise the flag and wave it every time we do something. We just quietly go out, meet with our opinion molders, our elected officials, our neighbors, our families, our friends, and educate them to a level of understanding. And that is the problem that we have with a lot of these other organizations. God bless them, they're doing a great job as far as it goes. Most of them, however, are in the business to do what? Pardon?
Neoconservative.
Well, many are neoconservatives, but most of them are in the business of moving towards fielding candidates. If the votes aren't there, ladies and gentlemen, I don't care how many candidates they field. If you're going to, even in a fluke, elect one of them, you will be actually just replacing one problem with another. Doesn't make any sense. Unless you build that layer of understanding out into the community that produce a solid vote for constitutionalists. And that's what's going to happen if we do our job. In the single districts that Jim is putting together with staff, we plan, and we're accelerating that program very well. It's going right now, or it looks very good, to change the Montanas and the Dakotas and the Wyomings and those sorts of things into a solid base of conservatism. Now, I know what's going to happen. These other outfits are going to come in and field candidates, and they're going to win, and they say, see, look, we did it. But it will have been you. You see, it would have been you quietly going out and changing things in your community that produced those votes. But the happy thing about all of this right now that really sends chills through my body is that this is the first time in my lifetime that I've seen a massive movement, not a conservative movement, not a Republican movement, but a constitutional movement. This is the first time that I've actually seen people who seem to want to build a republic, who seem to want to defend the Constitution, not get behind a Newt Gingrich, which is kind of negates Larry McDonald. When you sent good one, bad one, even, at any rate. But we do see that the other side is tremendously afraid of this movement. They're trying everything they can right now to co-opt the movement and throw it off track and get them doing silly things or ineffective things or just getting in front of the wave and leading it back into another contract for America. And I don't think they're going to be successful this time. And I think that worries them because they're trying to do everything they can to marginalize it by tar brushing it with the few that stand out that are a little bit ridiculous looking in some of the things that they say and do. But the reason they're not going to be able to do it, ladies and gentlemen, is because of you. So many of you are involved in the campaigns for liberty and the Tea Parties and all these other organizations that have understanding, that have experience particularly. And experience counts for so much in this movement. It isn't simply a knowledge of the Constitution. If you don't know who your enemy is within your own movement, then you're in trouble because they're going to sidetrack you. But we've got experienced birchers in a lot of these things, and it's just giving them fits. And they're not going to be able to succeed. But at the same time, what we have to do is to build on that. Build that layer of understanding, particularly amongst the leadership that you see out there in these movements, and fill them with that understanding to the point of where they link arms with you and start to really build the movement into something that's solid and lasting that will go on for years and years and years. And that's what we are trying to do with everything that we do in headquarters of the John Birch Society. We are producing new tools. We've got all sorts of things on the drawing board. The only thing that prevents us from victory is money. Now, this is not a pitch for money. Not really.
Take it, though.
Take it, yeah. But all I'm saying is that we've got things that we can be doing. You're going to be pleased to see next year we're going full ahead with the JBS TV to where it'll be a daily thing, live. We will have newscasts and that sort of thing. The world we live in is instantaneous information, isn't it? Now, if we don't keep up with it, if we don't utilize the social networking to bring in better organization of boots on the ground, we're going to lose. So we've got to keep ahead of the curve on this thing. We got way behind the curve when it came to the internet. And we're catching up. Our influence is really growing very, very well. Just for instance, in the last 2 months, our unique viewers on the New American site has grown by 40%. You know, that's a tremendous, and this is not a fluke. This is a straight line growth, and it's phenomenal to witness. It's because we give so much unique content out there online, but we've got a long way to catch up with WorldNet Daily and Newsmax and those things. But we've got about 150,000 unique viewers that come onto our website every month. By unique, I mean this. We measure it month by month. And if you come online on a Monday the first Monday, and you leave and you come back next Wednesday, you're not counted again. You're never counted again in that 30-day period of time. A lot of people will tell you, we got so many page views, we got so many views, that sort of thing. No, no, no. How many unique viewers do you have on your website? We can talk about in the millions, if you want to, about page views on the JBS sites, but that's not a real barometer. How many individual people come onto our site? Can you imagine influencing 150,000 people a month, even 10 years ago? But where we have to be ahead of the curve is on JBS TV, because we've got to be able to not only report on news, but also give analysis of the news, build understanding on principles in the news, and be ahead of everybody else so that they don't get sidetracked into some cul-de-sac of ineffective activity. So those are some of the things that we're planning on doing. We're going to need your help on it, because we're going to want individuals all over the country in our organization being able to stream back video to help us on some of these things. We're going to be asking people to go out and video events, and we can stream them on the TV station right away, and that sort of thing, same day, just like as if you were newsmen, so to speak. So that's going to come into play. But we know that as a result of that, we're going to have tremendous influence. And we look really forward to tweaking the tail of the insiders, ladies and gentlemen. It's a lot of fun. So brace yourself. You're going to have a smile on your face in a year or two, believe me. Things look bleak. But you know, these people have problems too. They really do. I like to quip. The biggest problem we have with dealing with this conspiracy is that we're dealing with criminals. And we have to be moral and ethical. You know what the biggest problem they have? They're dealing with criminals. You ever think about that? You know, they don't like each other, let alone us. Because they want to be the big shot. Just like the mafia. They bump each other off on the streets of Chicago and New York to be the big shot. They do it also amongst these people. And so that gives us hope too. They've got a lot of problems you don't see. And they're starting to experience those problems, even though you may not realize it now. They're throwing a lot of things our way for one reason only, and that is because they got to get something done now, because they know that the tide is turning against them. So they're doing that. The other reason they're doing it is to diffuse us. That's part of that. They want us to get going on this and this and this and this and this and this. And so we've got to focus our efforts and focus them on the things that are going to make a difference in the long run. Sort of get up at the top of the pass and meet them there so that they can't get over the pass to victory. And so we're going to have to figure out what that is. We already know, but we're going to start refocusing the organization back on those things that in the long run are going to defeat these people, in addition to the other aspects that we've got to deal with right now, but not on a campaign level. We will formulate campaigns that mean things for victory in the long run, and work through our email alerts and that sort of thing to work on health care and so on and so forth, as important as that is to defeat. So at any rate, there's a lot of things we've got going. I think you're going to be pleased with the direction that you see us going, and the way you can participate and really achieve success if you will use the tools the way they're meant to be used. Thank you very much.